It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, I'd like to start with you this week and talk a little bit about this remarkable student protest movement that we're seeing related to Israel's occupation of Gaza. You know, I don't have to remind you that Ronald Reagan got into the governorship in California in many ways because of the Berkeley student protests. And we all know that Richard Nixon took that kind of energy and was able to win the presidency. I mean, these things sometimes affect politics a lot. And I want to know your perspective.
So it's, I think, a lot more complicated now than we're seeing in the media, and I'm sure it will begin to sort itself out. I'm a graduate of UCLA, so it was particularly painful this morning to wake up and see the campus in the state that it's in. And I covered and watched the Columbia University issue quite closely. I actually increasingly believe it's not appropriate to call these student protests, because I'm not sure how many students really make up the entire group. And I'm also pretty certain that the leadership is not coming, when it comes to civil disobedience and actually vandalism and trespass and all that, I think it's coming more from professional protesters. And it used to be, when I was a student at UCLA, we had protests there. We had much bigger protests, of course, at UC Berkeley, as you point out. But it used to be some of the provocateurs were sort of under the radar. Today they're online. They talk proudly about it. One group talks about it's now time to, quote, throw fuel on the fire and take advantage of these quote, student protests. And in Columbia, at Columbia University, they captured on video a woman leading the chants and applause when the building was invaded. And the woman is 62 years old. According to articles, she claims she's been arrested 80 to 100 times. She's known as Professor Occupy because she actually trains people how to collapse and have to have the police haul them away. So we have this, I think it starts with people having a legitimate concern about public policy, and I'm totally for their right to expression and to protest, but it quickly turns into a media event that I don't think the students anticipated. And this morning on CNN, I thought this spoke volumes. They interviewed a professor who'd been out among the crowd, and he said, you know, this kind of started when 4 huge buses drove up and just hundreds of people that we don't have no idea who they are came onto our campus. And I think that's what we're dealing with. Now, it does have a political impact. And I think one of the realities is some people are trying to find their voice. I would add to that list President Biden, who, when you look at some articles today, they all talk about how quiet he's been. The Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, has not been quiet. He's been adamant about these people should be arrested and prosecuted. And so we can't confuse the right to free speech, the right to peaceful assembly, the right to peaceful protest with the kind of scenes we're seeing today. I looked it up today, the recent number, there are almost 48,000 students on the UCLA campus. As this professor said, at this moment in time, they want to go to class. They want to take their tests. They want to graduate, and they want to go on summer break. They are not part of this scene at UCLA, this encampment. And by the way, I think someone's got to examine what in the world college and university officials are thinking to let these encampments form to begin with. So I think we need to get a hold of this because it's spreading, and it's spreading by professional protesters who want to take advantage of a situation for whatever the reason might be.
Al, I hope Northwestern was on the list of the protests, given its standing in the country. What's your take about all this?
Well, first of all, I just want to clarify something you said in your introduction. There was no Israeli occupation of Gaza. The Israelis pulled out of Gaza in 2005. Hamas controlled Gaza and started this war with a terrorist attack. I think that needs to be clear because it's something we have seemed to have lost in the discussion over the last several months. Northwestern is part of it. Unlike UCLA, they didn't bring in the cops. They capitulated, but that isn't the right answer either. And 7 members of a newly formed committee on anti-Semitism, including a member of the Board of Trustees, resigned in response to the capitulation. So that campus is going to be split like every other. And I must say, at Northwestern, the encampment is right in front of the library where all my papers are. So I hope they don't get into the library and do any damage. I doubt that they will. These campus protests don't help Biden. They never help the incumbent. Chaos is not something that voters appreciate, whether it's, and whether it's crime or, the border or unrest on college campuses. When things look out of control, the incumbent always pays some sort of price. He looks weak, and I've always believed the number one attribute people want in a president is strength. For Biden, it's a twofold problem. One, this close race in anything could flip it. I mean, we're talking about razor-thin margins in those swing states, one way or the other. And so anything that costs him any votes is going to be a problem. But the second part is it undercuts a lot of his argument that Trump brings the chaos. It's just going to be a lot. It's just going to make it more confusing. I mean, you looked at the stuff in Colombia, and it wasn't quite as bad as January 6th, but, it looks like disorder and disarray. So that's not going to help. I agree with most everything Craig said, and I don't know the answer about how many of these demonstrators were outsiders. I suspect what he said is correct. I know it's correct about Colombia, and I've heard the same thing about UCLA. For Biden, I guess to me it underscores a problem that I hear from even his strongest supporters. And that is he tends to react rather than lead. I've said before there are 2 parts of being president. One is getting legislation passed and being very skillful inside. And Biden is about the best we've ever seen at that, up there with LBJ. But the other part is leading the country, setting a tone, setting a context for the national debate. And that's where he has not done very well. Actually, ironically, the place where he was the clearest was in the first 2 or 3 days of this war, when he went over to Israel, when he came down strong, he was clear, he was decisive. But if the casualties mounted, which of course was the Hamas strategy, to have higher casualties because they expected the world public opinion to turn against Israel, as it has in the previous wars they provoked. He basically went back to being much more reactive. Now, I know he's worried about the youth vote and a lot of these polls that show voters of color not as supportive, Hispanics, even black males. And he's, maybe this was just coincidental, but among the things he's done in the last week to address that are things like reimburse more student loans, loosen the policies on marijuana. It reminds me of, and Craig may remember this, it was very painful when I was in the White House, when Jimmy Carter, in response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, reinstated draft registration. He was taught and then gave a speech talking to the demonstrators outside who were against it. And my thought was, you can't really go in the middle. If you're going to reinstate the draft, reinstate the draft. If you're going to do registration and make a speech that you're not going to do the draft, why are you making them register? I mean, and Biden sort of got himself in that position. What I think he needs to do is come out strong. He's been on the right side of this issue, and he needs to make the case for it. And he's suffering because he hasn't pounded away at the real context of what's happened over there. That it was started by the terrorists. The terrorists are the people who want genocide. They want to eliminate the state of Israel. Their strategy is to increase their own casualties. I mean, I'm reading the Israeli press, and it's very clear that Sinwar thinks any number of Gazan casualties is fine if it suits the purposes of Hamas. And, if he does that, if he comes out strong, I think he's going to be much better off. Sometimes when you want to prevent a wider war, and you're so focused on preventing it, you actually make that more possible to happen. Look, I don't think he's going to win with the demonstrators of the far left or the far right. But if he doesn't speak out more clearly, he's going to wind up losing the voters in the vital center. And those are the voters that without which he cannot win.
Greg, going back to politics, I mean, how do the Republicans take advantage of this moment?
I always hate to kind of when you're looking at some of the actual tragedy that's occurring on these campuses, thinking of political advantage is always a bit troubling. But I do agree with Al that this does not benefit an incumbent president, and especially an incumbent president who is not, in a way, taking advantage of the moment to appear strong and decisive. If it takes me 15 minutes to read a story and then to find out who Professor Occupy is, so that I could tell this story about this provocateur who was on the Columbia University campus, the president's got the FBI behind it. They know who these people are. They know who these groups are. One of the groups that's involved was formed in 1985, and it was raided in 2010 by the FBI because of its terrorist associations. So these people are known, and the president has not only an opportunity, but almost a responsibility to tell the American people what he knows, what his administration knows, what they're doing to aid local law enforcement. And that is what that vital middle that Al talked about, that's what people are waiting for. So Republicans who theoretically have always been pretty outspoken about dealing with crime and law enforcement, it's an opportunity for them to make strong statements. Honestly, some of the strongest statements have been coming from Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, and some other Democrats. Not because I think they're seeking any particular personal political advantage, but because they think it's the right thing to do. And in New York, in the case of Schumer, New York is affected by it. They, however, do lay a groundwork for Biden. And if people in the White House or in his campaign are making political calculations about, we need to keep him away from this, this is not good news, that's a horrible mistake. The only thing I saw from the Biden administration this morning was they issued a statement on abortion rights. What in the world are they thinking? That's the thing. They think that's going to drive the news today, the president's statement on abortion rights. It's just not going to get covered. And so there just seems to be a disconnect. And, one of the advantages, there's a lot of advantages to incumbency. You get Air Force One, you get, travel the world and the country. But one of the challenges is people can put something right at the top of your agenda that you never anticipated. And I think this is probably a moment in time when they're trying to figure out just what exactly to do about it. And the failure to do anything or say anything relevant is a sign of weakness. And I think Republicans will either come out strong on law enforcement or just let the administration kind of wallow in indecisiveness, which is politically damaging for the Biden administration.
Al, you have the last word this week.
I think what the president needs to do, and I hope the Republicans do, is do the right thing. I think when you try to take a political advantage of situations that are bad for the country, you always wind up being a half step short. sort of like when I was marching when I was in the Army. Just I was always a half step out of step. And so I think that's what both of them ought to do, and it's really incumbent the president do that. Just a couple of observations. We've talked about UCLA and Northwestern and Columbia, and those were deep colleges in big, basically Democratic areas. But there was also a demonstration at the University of Alabama yesterday that Bill Kristol wrote about this morning. And in it, there were two sides yelling at each other as usual, but at the end, it didn't get violent, and they sort of talked, and then they started a common chant. And it was something I suppose we're not supposed to say here, but it was F Joe Biden. So both sides have a common enemy. Biden, as I said, is not going to win that. We also have to recognize that over the split on Israel and the Palestinians is not new in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is predominantly pro-Israel. But there has always been, going back to the 1980s, remember Jesse Jackson talking about Hymietown, always been a very vocal minority in the Democratic Party that has been anti-Israel, and that's probably grown a little bit as the party becomes more obsessed with identity politics. Biden's dealing with a tough split in the party. What he's trying to do, Craig mentioned the abortion statement. I talked about student loans and marijuana. He's trying to go after constituency by constituency. And I don't know what Craig's experience is, but mine is that that's a losing strategy. Because for everything you gain with one group, you lose with another. And particularly when there are these all-encompassing issues, overriding issues that just have to be dealt with. And you can't deal with them by statements from your spokesman. But Joe Biden won the Democratic nomination and won the presidency essentially because he was a centrist Democrat. And if he's going to win again, if he's going to win re-election, he has got to define the party. He can't let the left-wing fringe define the Democratic Party because we'll lose. It's that simple. And so I know with a background like his on the Hill, I spent decades on the Hill, people try to compromise and smooth off rough edges. But sometimes you just got to be strong and clear. And when you're president, you got to be strong and clear. And when the country's going through a very difficult time, it needs to be able to look to its president to get, its North Star. And that's what Biden needs to do. If he does that, he will mitigate any damage from these demonstrations, and he'll probably win the White House. But if he doesn't, he's going to, we're going to be where we've been the last several months with a very tight race where any little thing could tilt it one way or the other.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.